Following on from last week, we're going to talk about White Noise 2 from 2007, later given the suffix The Light, even though it doesn't form part of the original title sequence, as you'll have just seen. And this was directed by Patrick Lussier, written by Matt Venn, or Venne, it's V-E-N-N-E, could go either way, and stars Nathan Fillion, Katie Sackhoff, Craig Fairbrass, Josh Ballard, Kendall Cross, and a great turn from Terrell Rothery, who, if you're like me, you mainly know from Stargate SG-1. And this was what Brad Baverstock originally wanted, so here is your actual hat tip. Thank you for suggesting this. I know you wanted this one. I had to cover the first one. Like I said last time, for completion's sake, I don't like to do sequels without the original unless there's a really good reason. Technically this would have flown because it doesn't really take much of the story on, but I still wanted to do it and revisit both of them as much as anything, so I've got a good basis of comparison. But again, thank you for the suggestion. And any suggestions that come my way, I will entertain. I will hopefully, I think so far I've got a 100% track record of eventually doing them. But if I can't, I'll certainly let you know why, whether I've covered it before or just something I don't think I can really get my head around or I don't think really is worthwhile. I will certainly let you know, but like I say, for the most part, I do pick them up and eventually do them. And you can contact me any which way. I think on the About page there is an email address for business inquiries. This would count. Just put in the subject, suggestion or whatever. But, there's messaging, there's comments. Please let me know. Any films, games, TV series, whatever it may be, I will certainly have a look at whether I can do anything with it. But preamble over, let's get into the meat of this. So yeah, this is so much better than its predecessor in so many ways as well, which is really weird. I did have a note for the original that I didn't actually get round to in the video, I totally forgot about. But the effects were pretty terrible, I think is as nice as I can be about it. They were just terrible overlays that someone with After Effects now could do infinitely better. An amateur right now could do better than an actual Hollywood production of 2005. That says a lot. But 2 years later, and okay, some of the glow effects are a little overblown, but the effects quality, which is what I'm really comparing here, like the tunnels and everything like that, was better. Still a bit wonky by today's standards, but they were so much better 2 years down the line. It shouldn't make much of a difference. Even the faculty, as awful as that looks now, less than a decade later, in the original White Noise, the effects were nowhere near as good. I don't understand why. Again, maybe that leans back on the faith of the studio and everything like that behind it. But this story really starts with the death of Nathan Fillion's wife and child getting shot by Craig Fairbrass. But there's this whole weird thing where he apologises and his wife seems to be having some kind of migraine/seizure combo and talking about Triamera. And, it's obviously a depressing thing for Abe to have to deal with, obviously. But he just can't deal with it. He tries his best, but ends up taking his own life in the end. Leaving a voicemail, which I've always said, there is a difference between an actual suicide attempt and a cry for help. If he really wanted to end his life, he wouldn't have changed his outgoing voicemail message to say, sorry, I'm not going to be here anymore, bye, kind of thing. You don't let people know if you really want to go. That's how it works. A lot of the time, just to slightly sidetrack, but it is on topic, I guess, a lot of times people are surprised when people take their own lives because everything seemed fine. They were getting their affairs in order. Well, of course they were getting their affairs in order because they wanted to make sure that any family remaining was sorted out and cared for. They wanted to make sure any loose ends were tied up so that they weren't causing problems. Because at the end of the day, they didn't want to, make it much harder than it had to be on people. That's often how it goes. So if there's a big song and dance about it, it's a cry for help. And I think that really was the case with Abe. But he comes back, he's brought back by doctors and starts seeing an aura around people. But only certain people, not everyone. And over time he learns that this aura is actually a signifier that they're going to die soon. Within a matter of hours, days, it's never really that long. But it's only certain people. And, he's reading the headlines of people dying. He's like, oh wait, that's that person, and seeing these things. And he really sort of, goes down the rabbit hole. A great performance by the guy who plays Dr. Karras, who might be a reference to The Exorcist, who knows, who weirdly has a hoop earring, which my partner works in a hospital now, and you can have simple studs if you really have to, but really there should be minimal ornamentation. I know like Doctors in America are meant to be these larger-than-life characters, particularly in media, but I know that wouldn't fly over here. But by the by, I think the sunglasses are a bigger problem. But he's a big Elvis fan, has a big TCB, Taking Care of Business ring, all that. And, he's obsessed. His research that he's doing, basically, I think, just to get extra money, by the looks of it, is all about, like, EVP and stuff like that. That's one of the threads they pick up from the first one. And he basically comes to the conclusion that Abe is kind of like the static on TV or a radio that's tuned just to between stations, that he's actually like a receiver, and he's getting these messages and he's knowing who's going to die. He goes around saving lives, but realises through various interactions and even going back and seeing Craig Fairbrass, who kind of shot himself and wanted to die at that point in time, who's now disfigured. There's this whole thing about how he realised that, once you've saved this life, you're responsible for it. And a lot of these people, because they're meant to die, end up killing people down the line. Something just flips in their brain and they just go off and they go off and kill people. And it comes to the conclusion that it's actually 3 days after, which is a weird link to the devil and to the resurrection of Christ is one angle, but no, it's mainly the devil angle we're looking at. And this is where the film lost me, unfortunately. I love possession films as much as the next person. I love ghost stories as much as the next person. I love sci-fi, which arguably you could argue there's an element of it here. But when you start at one angle, like, oh, this weird spiritual thing, and then you slap the devil on it, it just doesn't work for me. I don't like the idea that the devil is the reason. I think a lot of reviews, actually, that I've seen about this, even though I always say I don't like to look at other reviews before doing my own, I did make my notes first, to be fair, but then I was looking at another review, and a lot of people have felt that, 3/4 of the film, like the first few first couple of acts and a bit extra, fine. It builds up this mystery, builds up this whole idea of like, wait, you're saving people, but they end up killing people, so the net result is more death because you've saved someone's life. It's an awful situation. Ethically, it's wrong. The balance is very out of alignment. You should be as minimal death as possible. So really, these people should have died. That would have restored the status quo. But then all of a sudden, it slaps on this, the devil's taking control. After 3 days, the devil's like, no, I'm going to take their souls or whatever. And that lost me. I really didn't like it. For the most part, this film does what it wants to really well. It's got a great love story with Sherry and Abe. The chemistry between Katie Sackhoff and Nathan Fillion is great. I could watch these people in a romantic comedy and I'd be totally happy about it. And I don't like most romantic comedies. I find them a bit kind of by the numbers and cookie cutter versions, but I could watch them because they've got such good chemistry and they work so well together. Sherry's colours in hair I also love, but that's a whole separate thing. But I loved their interaction so much, and the fact that he realises, wait, I saved her, I'm going to have to kill her. Oh no, I can't do this. That got me, and like I say, there was the EVP reference, but also we had a cutting from Mary Freeman, who was one of the people from the first one. So they are bringing these threads together, but the end just loses me. I don't know how they could have ended it otherwise. Maybe just some weird thing where you've touched the other side and you're tainted. Just an effect of touching the afterlife, because you don't need to put religion into it. The afterlife as a concept is universal. But the Christian afterlife is different from the Buddhist afterlife, for example. So I think you have to really be careful when you're putting the religion in. And yes, it's a Hollywood film, traditionally Christian country. There's a lot of Christian films that have come out, sort of around that time and a bit before. And this is post, sort of 9/11, where people are wanting the world to be normal and the values to be, there's good and there's evil. There isn't middle ground. There isn't grey. There's good and there's evil. So the devil's evil, making like someone trying to do good, making it a bad thing. And I understand that. It's a product of its time. We still have shadows of that now. We're still not over that many years later. If this film would have ended just in the way of like, okay, this weird thing happens, so he's got to sacrifice himself to right the wrongs and reset the balance, it would have been fine. He does get the happy ending. He goes, you know, he does manage to meet up with his family again, and you know, Sherry can carry on her life, and you know, hopefully he's ended this cycle. But then we get the pointless jump scares. Well, we got a couple throughout the film, but at the end we've got that end sting. It had lost me with the whole satanic, but then it does an end sting and doesn't really have. It's not setting up a threequel, if you will, at that point. There is nothing in that end sting that's like, what's going to happen? Tune in for the next one. It's just a way of going, big shock, there you go, leave the auditorium like going, oh, that was great because my heart's racing now. That's why they did it. Maybe they knew the ending was a bit weak and they weren't really happy with it. But this film, it's still better than the first one, and I enjoyed a lot of the setup. I love the fact that they let Nathan Fillion play to his comedy strengths, because he is a funny guy. Katie Sackhoff is very versatile. I've seen her recently in Another Life, I think it is. And she's a very different character than in this, and she's a very different character than she is in Oculus. She's a very different character in so many different things that I've seen her in. You know, this is, I think, her most typically girly role I think I've ever seen her in. But she plays this well. She's clearly got the talent to be able to move into different roles, but there's so much, like I say, the chemistry. There's so much to love about this film that even with that ending, I do love it. I like some of the ideas raised, the idea that you could have a near-death experience, and that taints you to be able to see people who are near-death. Hence the glow. That's why he sees it, because they're also near-death. I literally made that connection as I was recording this. But one of the biggest things, aside from the whole all the Satan thing, is Triamera.
Triamera. Triamera. What?
Technically, they tweak it, really. It's more should be like Tritemera or something like that, I believe, the actual biblical Greek, which wouldn't make 666. And Triamera doesn't mean third day, it basically means 3 day. So they twist biblical Greek to suit their own ends to make this satanic plot work. You see why I don't like the satanic plot? There's so much convenience and making it work because they wanted it to. But, like I say, Nathan Fillion playing to his comedy strengths, Katie Sackhoff and Nathan Fillion's chemistry, some of the ideas raised. I love it in spite of its flaws. And like I say, I was really happy to rewatch this. Much more happy than I was to rewatch the first one. I'd kind of forgotten most of the first one, I realised when I was rewatching it. This one I was like, oh yeah, this happens next, this happens next. Oh, he's got it off, his face blown off. Everything was in there. I remembered it vaguely, even though it was very near its original release. And I'd have loved to see what more could have been done with the White Noise franchise, if you will. Now, there are films that have taken on certain ideas of it. This idea of like knowing when you're going to die, or people communicating with the dead after, you know, near experiences, things like that. And there are certain things that I think I'm going to cover soon that might be considered kind of carrying on the ideas raised in films like this. But yeah, you know, if you've only seen the first one and you're like, I'm not going to see the sequel because the first one was ugh, don't let that sully you. Literally, go out now and watch this film. If you've seen both of them, don't rewatch the first one. Just watch this one. It's funny that the first film failed critically and was enough of a box office success to get a sequel. The sequel succeeded critically. I think that's the key here. But it wasn't a big box office success. Maybe we can give this a resurgence. Only 13 years too late. 15 years from the first one. And maybe we can get some more entries in this series. I think that's all I want to say about White Noise 2, The Light, as it later became. And again, thank you very much for the suggestion, Brad Baverstock. Keep them coming. I love suggestions. I've got a big list, but I can always add to it. But until next time, as always, thank you for watching, and take care.